Greetings from Kenwell. Today is Valentine's Day 2022. This is the day of love. And today I want to tell you two love stories. The first story is a story from myself. It all started back in 1974 when I met this young, beautiful 18-year-old woman named Darlene. We met at Matthews Hall Christian Fellowship at McMaster University. After the very first meeting, Darlene needed a ride home, and since I had a car, I volunteered to give her a ride. This was the start of a wonderful friendship. All that year we got together for lunch and we started to get to know each other really well. Well, then in second year, we were in the same second year calculus course and we sat together for every lecture. Not only that, but almost every day at the Med Center we had lunch together. Finally, on Friday, October 10th, 1975, I asked Darlene out for our first official date. It's really neat. Every Friday at McMaster University, they have these $2 movie nights where I like to say they show all the latest movies. And so this movie was Gone with the Wind. Definitely not a modern movie. But nonetheless, at around 6 p.m. I phoned Darlene up and I asked her if she would come with me to see the movie. I didn't know that one should never ask out a young woman with only about half an hour to get ready. I found out later on that day that in the half hour that before I picked her up, she had showered, washed her hair, blow dried it, put on her makeup, and by the time I saw her, she looked absolutely wonderful. It was a wonderful date, and we both enjoyed ourselves seeing the movie. And after the movie, it was the first time for us to hold hands. Oh, and that was very wonderful. I remember when I drove her home, I went up to her door and I gave her our very first kiss. I like to quote the movie, The Princess Bride. Since the invention of the kiss, there have been 5 kisses that have been rated the most passionate, the most pure. This one left them all behind. Now this was Thanksgiving weekend, and on Saturday morning I drove back to my home in Oshawa to celebrate it with my parents. But one thing I did know was that from the very first date, I knew that I was going to marry Darlene. Of course, I never told her this until much later, but in my heart, I knew that she was the woman for me. It was a few months later, when I was at her house, that I found out Darlene's response to our very first date. Her younger sister, Bonnie, came up to me and said, "Oh, Darlene really likes you." I asked her, why do you think that? She told me that when Darlene came from our first date, she was hiding upstairs when Darlene came in. She said that when Darlene closed the door behind her, she jumped up into the air and yelled, "All right." So I do know that I made a lasting impression from her. Well, when I got back from Oshawa, we were virtually inseparable. Of course, at nighttime, because we were very good Christians. We continued to have lunch together every day, and almost every night we studied together. Then it was 1 year later, on October 23rd, we were engaged. And then a year and a half later, on May 13th, 1978, we were married. Every year, I celebrate 3 anniversaries. This last October 10th, that was the 46th anniversary of our first date. And then this last October 23rd, that was the 45th anniversary of our engagement. And this coming May 13th, that will be the 44th anniversary of being married to the absolute love of my life. Wow, 44 years coming up, that's just amazing. Now, I want to tell you a very romantic Bible story. And it's a story found in Genesis about Jacob and Rachel. And it's found in Genesis chapter 29. Now, Jacob had been sent by his father Isaac to find a wife from his mother's family in a city that was called Haran. After traveling the long distance to Haran, he arrived at a well where he saw some shepherds. He asked them if they knew his uncle Laban. They said yes, and not only that, look over there, there is Rachel, Laban's daughter, coming to water her sheep. Well, as soon as Jacob laid eyes on Rachel, he was smitten. He just couldn't believe how beautiful she was. The Bible tells us that she was beautiful and lovely. I like to say that she was almost as beautiful as Darlene. So that definitely says a lot. The first thing Jacob did was to remove the stone at the well, and he watered all of Rachel's sheep. Well, I think it's very obvious that Jacob simply wanted to show off by showing what he could do. Things obviously went very well, as the Bible tells us that Jacob kissed Rachel right there and then. It was only a month later, after being with Rachel, that he asked her father Laban for her hand in marriage. The deal was that Jacob had to work 7 years for Laban, and then he could marry her. One of the most beautiful verses in the Bible is found in Genesis 18, verse 20. And it says, "So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her." You gotta admit, that's a beautiful verse. So finally, the night of the wedding arrives. But Rachel's dad, Laban, he decided to trick Jacob. He substituted his older daughter, Leah, since Laban believed that the oldest daughter should always get married first. Think about it. She was a sister, looked very similar. Well, what they did, he put on a very heavy veil over her face with long flowing garments covering her body, so she got through the ceremony undetected. And then by whispering that night in the darkness, she made it through the entire night. But you can imagine Jacob's utter consternation when in the morning light, he found that it wasn't Rachel, it was Leah, the older sister. He was probably furious with the whole family for their double-dealing fraud. Well, Laban told him that he can marry Rachel in a week from now, but he would have to serve another 7 years for Rachel, and he did so. Just think, 14 years he served for these two sisters. It really is quite the story. And if you continue reading the story, you will know that Jacob eventually became the father of 12 sons who became the 12 tribes of Israel. And if you want to read the entire story, just look it up in Genesis. So I hope everyone today has a very happy Valentine's Day. I gave Darlene a beautiful Valentine's Day card this morning, and she did also. May the good Lord be with you until we meet again next week.